So why don't I just start by introducing myself. So my name is Amir, and I'm an Israeli living here in Tel Aviv, and spending most of my time either traveling around the world and doing turnaround for corporations, or working with groups of CEOs and their spouses on their lives and the issues that they face. And for me, the issue that we want to talk about today, being in the moment, and your work around constellation, is a big piece of what I focus on, both in the personal practice as well as the work that I do with CEOs in different constellations that we create around their life issues and their business issues. Go ahead.
My name is Milan. I'm actually originally from Germany. I live in Israel now for the last 16 years. Today I work in therapy. I give individual sessions. I do something that is called body-related psychotherapy. And I also lead groups around personal growth, spiritual growth, relationship issues. And family constellation is one of the approaches I use when I look at issues around personality, around family issues.
Okay, great. So how did you end up doing this thing in your life? What brought you to this?
Through a crisis. Actually, I come from the consulting field. Until about 10 years ago, I used to be a strategy consultant for an international consulting firm. Mm-hmm. That's also what I did in Germany back then. And then I led a team of strategy consultancy here in Israel. And that is what I did for many, many years. Mm-hmm. I worked with international companies. And then through a personal crisis, I revisited, I would say, my own life. Mm-hmm. And tried to understand what I really want to do. And for me, it was clear that until then, what I worked in, although it was as close as possible as I could at that time, was a compromise for me. And what I'm really passionate about was therapy. So I made that switch. And about 8 years ago, I moved from the corporate field to the world of therapy.
Mm-hmm. So it's interesting because what I find an interesting challenge today is how to bring what you would call a therapeutic process or a process of personal growth into the corporate arena. Right. And to create a connection between the two. So a lot of people talk about balance between work and family, and I think the issue is not really balance, because that's almost like a lost case in some situations, but rather an integration, which is how do you bring the dimensions of personal life to be more dominant in your work sphere, and vice versa. Mm-hmm. So, for instance, I took my son into running a workshop that was a parent-child event, where we were teaching techniques of how to communicate with your child around issues of conflicts between the two of you, how to do conflict resolution, how to coach each other towards a solution. And my son was my co-partner in the exercises, so we were standing next to each other in front of the whole group, and he was saying, "Dad, you travel too much and I don't see you often." And so we used, okay, so let me make sure I hear what you're saying, and so we used the process. So tell me about an experience that you have in connecting your own experiences into the constellation work. Or maybe you want to tell a little bit about what the constellation work is, just that we better understand it.
So actually, family constellation is a therapeutic approach that was developed by a German psychologist called Bert Hellinger. And today it's also being used for companies. There it's called organizational constellations. And the basic premise is that there is a certain personal conscience that we all know, and that actually that's the way we relate in this world. Yeah? I have a certain personal conscience which tells me if my behavior in a certain social environment is right or not right. For example, the way I dress now. Is this the right dress code for this kind of setting? Yes. Mm-hmm. And my personal conscience made me dress the way I am now, so that I fit into this environment. Yeah? So we're actually doing that all the time in our life. Our values that we come with, they define the way we interact in different social groups, like our family, our friends, workplaces. So this is like the place where we know if we are in line with where we are at, or if we are off. Okay, and then we feel either innocence or guilt, right? In family constellations, we look at something that is beyond this sphere of personal values and takes us to something that is called the collective conscience. And the collective conscience, what it seeks to do is to find, I would say, a free flow of love inside the family system. And it says certain rules have to be obeyed in essence in order for love to flow freely within a family.
And what are those? And
there are three basic rules. They are called order, belonging, and balance. Those are the three rules. And I'll just very briefly talk about them. And what the collective conscience in essence says is any of those rules are broken, which actually happens in every family, because we come with our personal issues, so we also naturally have our personal needs, our personal fears, our personal angers. So we bring them into the family. So there is no balanced family in that sense. So there will always be entanglements or always be problems in a family system. But the collective conscience, what it seeks to do is to bring balance into the family. So the first rule is the rule of order, which actually says there has to be a certain order in every family. If that order is not kept, there are entanglements. What does it mean? For example, there is a father, there is a mother, and then there's the first child, second and third child, let's say. If one of the children, for example, take on the role of the father or mother, which happens in many family systems, right? What usually happens is that child feels very strong inside the family system, but it also creates an imbalance. Yeah? Let's say if a daughter takes the place
of her
mother opposite the father, then she might feel very attractive towards the father. She might feel very strong towards the mother, but in essence, what she also loses is her place as a child, that can receive, and that experience. She actually, and what we do in everything that is around family constellation, we do it out of love. The only thing we call it in family constellation, we call it blind love, right? The children, we always do something in order to keep the family system intact. So that daughter actually loses her place and her roots and takes on a different role. And of course that creates entanglements inside the family. That would be one. We can talk about many other examples on order, but I just want to give the highlights of the laws. The second law is the law of balance, which talks about two kinds of balances. One, in relationships, there has to be a balance between giving and receiving. So as a couple, I need to give to my partner, and my partner needs to give to me, and I have to be willing to receive. What many times does not happen in relationships, because if I give, again, I feel strong. But receiving actually makes me obliged. Okay, in that moment, the moment I receive anything in my life, I actually, in a way, lose my innocence, because I owe. It's like if you go to somebody and you're invited, right? You will want to bring something, even a glass of wine, a bottle of wine, or whatever, in order to balance the giving and taking.
That's right.
In a relationship, what is very important is that there is a continuous balance of giving and taking. This is the way a relationship can actually go really deep. What many times people don't want, again, paradoxically speaking, because what we do when we receive a lot and we give a lot, again, we lose our freedom. Yeah? We actually create a stronger and stronger bond.
Mm-hmm.
And this is many times people don't want to experience this loss of freedom, which is not necessarily a true freedom, but it's maybe also a loss of sense of self that they don't want to give up.
Mm-hmm.
So this is in balance. What happens in relationships? There is another balance between parents and children, where anybody who has children knows that the giving doesn't stop, right, until the children leave the home. So, and there can also actually be no balance in giving and receiving between parents and children, because what parents give to their children can never really be given back by the children, not in terms of time, money, in terms of love, attention, nights that you get up, to take care of your children. And there is also no expectation to balance that. But in Family Constellation we say that one of the reasons children leave the house at a certain point in time is because they sense this imbalance. And the way for children to give back is actually to continue the family in their own, and to give what they have received. Many times entanglements again happen here because children want to continue receiving, and whatever they receive doesn't feel enough for them. So we can find ourselves at the age of 30, 40, 50 still being angry at our parents and wanting something, right? And that actually keeps us in that place of the child. And this kind of entanglement is usually solved by saying thank you for what we've received, which is many times something very, very difficult for children, because there is always still an expectation. The third law is called belonging, and it often has the strongest impact on our lives. And it says that every member of the family system has an equal right to belong. So who belongs to the family? Of course, the mother and father and the children and all the grandparents, of course, and also uncles and aunts that have a blood connection. So let's say there is an uncle who is not liked by the family because he became a homosexual or whatever. So what we sometimes do is, or became religious, or whatever the reason is, what we do as a family sometimes is we excommunicate those members by not talking about them, by not allowing them to be close to the family. And this usually has a very, very strong impact on the family system. And somebody else in the family will remember those people by taking on their behaviors, by usually it's by the behavior and by the values that they live and so on. So we are actually not allowed to not include anybody who belongs to the family system.
So there's sort of like a responsibility that somebody takes intuitively to connect these people back in.
Yes. This is what the collective conscience actually does.
And why is that? What is the role of that collective consciousness?
The role of to balance the love in the family. That's the way. It's actually to allow the natural flow of life. So if we look back at the issue of order, the natural flow of life is for parents to give and for children to receive as children, right? And also in relationships, or in the issue of, that was the issue of balance, but in the issue of order, is for everybody to have his place, for the first child, which is like the firstborn, to have his place, and for the third child to have his place, right? And not to create any new orders here. But this is actually how life happened.
So every time there's a violation in order and giving and receiving and in the flow of love in the family, there is an imbalance that needs to be corrected. Otherwise, people live a life that is, wounded or
It's not everything that runs wrong in the family has a strong impact. That is something. It's something that we call a phenomenological approach in therapy. So family constellation gives a certain framework of what the work is about and the principles, but it's not religious about the theoretical concept. So in every constellation, we actually look at the issue and we see what comes up.
So when you say that family constellation is a way of dealing with the notion of being in the moment, do you mean that you let go of the past, that you process the past in order to be in the moment? Do you need to do work in order to come back into the moment?
Like every form of therapy, family constellation attempts to resolve something in the past so that we can be in the present.
So the assuming that if there's been a mismatch in order or in giving and receiving, then people will live the moment partially because they have an issue in the past that has not yet been resolved. Their attention will be somewhere other than where they are right now.
Exactly, yeah.
And is there a process where you actually let go of all that? How do you let go of the past in order to become present?
Let's take an example. The example between receiving between parents and children. All right, there is, for example, a process in family constellation where you face your parents, and first of all, you create a certain distance, physical distance, that allows you to see your parent. Because usually what happens is when we are too close to people, we can't really see them. This is what happens to us when we're in love, right? We're like conjoined with our partner, and our ability, something like this happens, and our ability to really see our partner is gone. And the same happens between children and parents. And this is why we allow the clients to separate to such a distance that they can actually say, okay, now I actually see
you
my
become
father.
an observer of your own reality.
Exactly.
And somebody needs to role play that father.
That's exactly.
Is the word role play the word appropriate for this? How would you describe that positioning?
We call those people representatives, because there is also something like drama therapy where you actually play a role. In family constellation, you don't play any role.
So when you take the role of being a representative, do you know the background and the history?
No.
So is this like voodoo? It comes to you from the universe?
Yes, something like that.
It's
very interesting because I myself, I wouldn't call myself a very spiritual person in the sense of believing in all kinds of esoteric things. But when I look at this work, I never know how it actually works. I don't understand it on the spiritual level. I just trust the work. But what happens is, in a constellation, you place somebody. Yeah, you take, if I'm doing the work around my family, then I would choose people from the audience.
And that choice would be a very conscious choice. There's going to be a reason why you chose somebody for a certain position.
I could also, no. Even the therapist could say those people will represent people, right?
Really?
But the issue is, what is important is that I actually take that person, that representative, for example, the one who represents my father, I take him by two hands and I place him intuitively inside, we call it a circle of energy.
I being the person who's doing the work now.
That's right.
I put them into a specific physical space within the larger space. And then what?
And then when I feel this is the right place, I actually let go.
Yeah.
And in that moment, what I do is I transfer knowledge to that person. And people start, and it's really amazing every time and time again, people start feeling the sensations of that exact person.
What do I tell them? I say, you're my father, and...
That's all.
And I don't say what the issue is, and you beat me up, or you were never there, or...
No. That is also something interesting around family constellation. We're not interested in characterizations of people. The only thing that we are interested is in facts that happened in the family system. So we look back at what happened, you know, where did significant events take place? Where did people have to leave a country of origin? Where were people killed? Where were there abortions? Like significant events, you know, where were children lost? Where was there a divorce early in childhood? So we don't look at the person was a bad person and this is why my mother separated from because he was always very angry and so on. This is not, we don't look for the characterization, we look for the facts.
And we tell them the facts or the people come up with it? Do I tell you if you play my dad, you know, that you were not there, that you traveled often?
That is not relevant. For example, in the family constellation perspective, it's not relevant.
That's not relevant.
No.
What would be irrelevant? First of all, do I tell the fact or does the person
tell
fact?
If you would be the client now and you have a certain issue, let's say your issue is you can't stand on your own 2 feet. You can't create a certain environment that is supportive for yourself, where you something around work, whatever it could be, and then we can look at it. So then I would ask you, so tell me a little bit about your family history, and then you would say something where your father came from, how many brothers and sisters he had, if something significant happened in his family, and also the same about your mother. And then I, as the therapist, I would take in that information, and I would decide who the relevant people would be to start working around that subject. All right. For example, that is a subject that, of course, usually has to do with the support of the father. If a man cannot stand in his life, then usually it has something to do with a relationship between him and his father. And so we would start probably with that. And maybe we would bring in the grandfather to see also where maybe didn't the father get the support he needed. So we create those interactions between the people in the constellation.
And so you map who do you think are the relevant potential role players
in the beginning,
like in this, and then he identifies them, or you identify the people.
I usually ask then the client to place those people, to choose certain people, let's say himself, somebody.
And the space is really important, where people are positioned.
Yes. Because it usually says something about the relationship inside the family system, right? And we can even imagine that if we would do like an imaginary constellation right now, we could imagine our own family and how we would position them. Where would my mother stand? Where would my father stand? Where would I stand, my brothers and sisters?
I've done this often in groups, actually. So I used to put my mother in the kitchen, because this is where she was, and so she was sort of like peeking in, and probably my dad is in the living room or by his study and his table. And I'm probably close to him. My sister is not there. She sort of like grew up quickly and disappeared from the house. And my brother is building something, so he's sort of like an engineer kind of type.
Right.
And I think that from a sense of closeness, I'm closer to my dad, and my brother is probably sort of like in between, and sort of like a twilight zone. And my sister is sort of like at the door, already on her way out. So at the age of 16, she already wanted to check out of the life of the family.
All right.
I think it was too intense for her in one way or another. So what would that tell you? What would you do with that?
First of all, I would ask you if there's a certain issue in your life that you're facing, right? From what you just said to me, I would more guess that there is an issue with women rather than with men, because career-wise, if you feel very close to your dad and bonded to the male side, then usually on that level we less face issues, and more than on the relationship with the mother.
Probably more on the relationship with the mother, and the sense of giving and connecting, and sort of like a physical relationship that was a bit difficult for her.
Right. So in that sense, we would probably place you and your mother, and maybe at a later stage your grandmother, all right? In order to see what kind of relationships were there with women. What do the women carry in their past, you know? Because like we as parents, of course, we can only give what we have, right? And that is actually something everybody faces when he gives. He always gives according to what people before him or her gave him. Yeah,
So
how we were not
that my mother did not get something of this nature.
Yes.
From her mother or from her father?
Well, that is already too far. I couldn't say. We would have to do a constellation, but we would probably put both. And this is why, again, we try out things. We see where there is a resonation between the people. We would see very, very soon where your mother actually needed support. If it would be from her father's side or from her mother's side.
And that would explain. So if there was a certain hostility with her father, she might have a certain resentment to men at large, or something underlining an issue there.
Well, usually the way it works is if the mother didn't respect the father, it's very difficult for the daughters to respect men. This is usually the dynamic. There is a certain, I would say, solidarity between women, the same way that there's a solidarity between men. Although, having said that, it's a very tricky issue because unconsciously, a child, also in separate, we see that in divorces, you know. Children are usually required to take a side. But unconsciously, children are always loyal, always, to both parents.
So you create that setting, and people speak from that position, and they share some insight about what? About their feelings, their thoughts?
Usually about their feelings.
Can they talk about their thoughts, or are they going to get into a Shakespeare lecture about life?
No, they can talk also about their thoughts, but usually the role of the therapist is to guide, is actually to feel this energetic field and to understand what are the dynamics. And this is actually what we're trying to do in Family Constellation. We're trying to uncover the hidden dynamics of the family system. So I would usually use sentences that I offer the representatives to say to one another and to see if those sentences resonate with them.
Give me an example for a sentence.
The sentence, for example, a son would say to his father is, "I'm angry at you." Right? And the moment the son would actually say the sentence to his father, something new happens. So we actually want to use sentences that reflect a certain reality so that we can move on. Right? So many times we're actually using, let's say, provocative sentences at the beginning in order to get to healing sentences. Another sentence, a very strong sentence that we use sometimes is for a daughter to say to her mother, "I'm like you, mother." Something that we usually as children try to avoid as much as possible. We say, "I will never be like you. I will never educate my children the way you did educate me," and so on. So there is a very big resentment and disrespect to our parents in terms of where we have similarities, and actually acknowledging those similarities. We actually started with this exercise that what would happen if I would place a son opposite his father or a daughter opposite her mother. This is exactly what we would do. We would first of all create this distance, and until the daughter can say to her mother, "Now I can see you." And then we would say something like, "Thank you for the gift of life. It's the greatest gift I've received." And we say this because it's actually the truth.
You make that sentence and you implant that into the sentence?
Yes, I offer that sentence.
So you're really offering reconciliation statements already.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely.
You're working on identifying and then on healing, really.
Yes.
And you're injecting the healing perspective into
Yes.
it. Does the person play themselves or someone else plays them?
It depends how ready the person is to feel. All right. If there is a lot of holding and a lot of anger, it usually makes sense to take another representative in place of that person, for that person just to watch. And to take in what is happening in the constellation. Usually a lot is already happening in the person watching. And then towards the end, when we're closer to a resolution, this is the time usually when I bring in the client himself and re-say sentences that have been said before in order to feel that. But it's actually not even necessary.
So to a large extent, you're managing that therapeutic process. It is not self-governed. It's not run on its own just by positioning people and telling them to either speak it out one way or another.
There is another form of family constellation therapy, it's called movement of the soul. In that form, you actually do the placement, and then you just sit down and don't interfere at all. And everything happens within the circle of energy.
Without giving people instructions about what to do and what not to do.
Nothing.
Cool.
Yes, it's quite cool.
And so this is really interesting. I can see how people can heal out of something like this because they both have an experience of expressing their anger and their unfinished business, but also moving towards closure around the issue by coming towards what would be reconciliation statements.
The reconciliation, I think this is an important part, comes out of respecting what was. Because this is also why part of the structure, for example, is also where we stand opposite our parents and we say a sentence like, I'm similar to you, and you actually tell about the similarities. You have to actually list them. I'm angry like you at men or whatever, I am a control freak like you, all the things where we actually identify places where we are similar. And that's in that way we're also saying to ourselves, I'm accepting the way I am or the way I feel, right? Because instead of rejecting it, because whatever we reject, of course, always holds us back the strongest. And then the second part is also to say to our parents that we respect the decisions they have made in their lives, which is also often an issue of disrespect where we actually don't, we don't accept that our parents maybe have been together for 30 years without loving each other the way we perceive love to be, or we don't respect our parents for for separating, or we don't respect them for the choice of profession or whatever it is. And to actually state that opposite your parents, to respect the decisions that have been made, also again brings us closer to accepting and to seeing the person and not just this ideal of what a father or a mother should be.
And that brings closure.
And that brings closeness, and that brings an open heart, and that brings also the closure. The closure comes from my perception, a closure comes from a deep, deep understanding. When I know that what has been done has not been done against me personally. It has been done out of a very much larger context. And not out of a personal...
I become forgiving because I understand that the way that they behave was maybe the best that they could have done under those circumstances.
That's for sure,
yeah. And then I forgive myself because I see myself in that situation as well.
I see myself in that person also.
Yeah. And how do you free yourself from that?
From what?
How do you let go? You said I saw a pattern of, not yourself, but somebody might see a pattern of a father who is very rigid and strict and very controlling, and that person recognizes this, they look at that and they say, okay, I see some of that in myself as well. And then what? Where's the breakthrough?
The breakthrough, first of all, comes from accepting your father inside yourself. to accept that reflection inside yourself and actually to accept it as a reflection of love. Because when we reject something, we're actually angry at that person. We cannot feel the love. And when I actually accept a similarity to one of my parents, something that I've rejected before, I'm actually in a different way. I'm saying, I'm receiving your love. I'm receiving the way you are as an expression of love, and I also accept it inside myself. Otherwise, we would judge those traits. So it has a lot to do with self-acceptance.
And then there's peace.
Hopefully. You know, there are so many things that have happened in our lives. So the way I see it from all the therapy that I have experienced and that I work with, it's always pieces of the puzzle. I don't know about anything that is magic. You know, we work slowly, and we open our heart to one other thing and another piece and another piece. And this is how we actually can, and so coming back to the moment, it's, for me, I definitely think so. It's an endless work.
When is it that you come to the moment?
Exactly. But with every piece of work that you do with yourself, you allow yourself to become more and more in the moment. What allows you to be in the moment is to be with less fear, or to be with the ability to contain the fear, to feel the fear. What keeps us from the moment is the rejection of our feelings. Because we think things should be a different way.
And is fear the dominant feeling that you're fighting with?
Yes. This is the dominant...
So either you feel fear and it takes you from the moment, or you're fighting your fear which takes you away from the moment. So do you embrace it?
This is why I love the word that you used before, the rigidity, right? And this is where we become, this is the other place of keeping the fear away. Sorry, what did you ask before that?
No. I'm sort of like curious on what do you need to do with fear in your life, really, in order to be in the moment?
You will have to find a way, we will, every one of us, we have to find a way to express it. Not opposite the people that we are afraid of necessarily.
Not in front of you.
Not necessarily. Except if there are people who are very close to us. And to take responsibility for it. Because what we tend to do is to blame people for what happens in our lives. And the key issue is, of course, to take responsibility, to know somewhere deep down that we have a choice, that we have the ability also to take control over our own lives. And that has to do with our ability also to contain things that we feel. It's my ability to understand why I feel certain things. It's my ability to contain my fears. It's my ability to express them. And it's also all my responsibility. I cannot give it to anybody else, which is what we usually want to do. We want to give it, we want to blame somebody else, or we want to give the responsibility to somebody else.
Which is really empowering people to take action over the things that they can and let go of what they can't in their life.
Absolutely.
Which is a great end result of any coaching process, by the way, is that people start realizing what's theirs and what's under their control. Cool. Let's do a practice of one of those things that you're talking about. Can we try it out and just see how that feels?
I can do a little guided imagery if you want.
Go ahead.
With you around the family, and then we can see what came up.
Good.
Even though you already gave a short picture of your home, but the way we do it usually is we disconnect it right now to places in let's say in the apartment, and we more look at who's standing next to who.
In my own family now.
Yes. So, but I would actually ask you to, first of all, if it's okay for you, you can also close your eyes, if that feels right for you. And you first of all look at your family history, and you try to understand and see what do you know about your family history. Where did your mother's family come from? Brothers and sisters, her parents.
Do you want me to answer that?
No, you don't have to. You don't have to answer.
Reflection.
Just a reflection right now. for you to get some kind of a sense of what actually happened there. What were the significant events? You know, did people have a very, for example, did some of the brothers or sisters in your mother's family or your father's family have a difficult destiny? That is usually something that has a strong impact. Or somebody disabled, or anything like that, or severe accidents or losses. Also, the parents of your father and mother, where did they come from? And here you can again look at significant events. Did they have to leave their home? Were they evicted from their homes? So first of all, in that place, to get some kind of a perception. What does your family carry? Just in terms of facts. So we can just take a short break here and see if anything came up.
So I see the details, I see the background and the facts, and where am I taking this now into?
So for example, if we would start working now, we would first of all do some kind of a screening of the facts to see what were significant events in order to see how they might have impacted your life, all right, or your family's life.
So my mother escaped Bulgaria, came as a child at the age of 16.
Alone,
after the war, after hiding during the war in Bulgaria. I think she was even married to someone for the purpose of getting a certificate. But came here and lived in a kibbutz, out of roots, felt being used a little bit in the kibbutz.
Okay, I would stop you already here because the first pieces of information were already very significant, right? So there is, first of all, a very young person who had to fight for survival at a very, very early age. So there is, of course, a lot of fear and unrootedness to leave your mother country. Yeah, this is a very significant issue. And even the issue of having been married, even if it was a fixed marriage, could have an impact on subsequent relationships. So these are two things that we could already look at, right? So let's do a second small exercise. If you want, you can close your eyes again. And right now I would invite you to bring up the pictures of your father and your mother. And also if you have brothers and sisters, yeah, to bring up their pictures. And then just take a moment to place them as if you were all in the same room. To place them, that means who is standing next to who is facing who, what is the distance between the different people. And just to take a few moments to look at that.
Yeah.
You can just tell me what
So I
did you
see my
notice?
brother next to my mother. My mother and father are facing each other from a distance. I'm next to my father, and my sister is somewhere in between, a bit torn.
All right. So just from that picture, if we take that picture, I would come with certain assumptions that I would then test inside the constellations. Yeah. So the closeness between your brother and your mother could, and again, I have to be very careful here. These are assumptions that we have to test. Could say something about the role your brother took because of the distance between your parents. One thing that we usually see when people fall in love, they really face each other. But when a couple is a long time together, they have to stand
next to each other
and look into the same direction. So in that sense, when there is a long-term relationship and couples face each other, it actually is a reflection of a conflict. So there is a conflict between the parents. Your closeness to your father is something that also is actually reflected by what you have said until now. There is a closeness between you and your father, and it's actually, from the sense that I get, it's also a very empowering closeness. It's something that strengthens you in your male energy and your maleness. But of course it keeps you away from your mother. Yeah? The one who is allowed to be next to your mother is your small brother.
Bigger.
Your bigger
older.
brother, sorry.
He's 4 years older. Yeah.
And there is could be a solidarity issue with your father that has something to do with your mother. You know, it's like what we would want to do here is to allow some kind of a process to happen between you and your father that will allow you to come closer to your mother again. Yeah? And the fact that your sister is in the middle, yeah, that means usually that she is trying to fix something inside the family, and she is torn between. She hasn't taken any position. Again, all these are just assumptions,
Very
and
true.
we would actually also see what resonates most with you, and then we would work
around. What I was
around
trying
them.
to realize or to understand through this process is what was, I think, the cause of lack of closure on relationships with women that I have in my life. You know, very passionate, very sensual, but really not singular in my nature. You know, and how is that a derivative of that constellation?
That again, that could have something to do with your father. I don't know if you want to talk about this here, but it's something usually that also is related to the father, first of all. Yes, if the father had many relationships or couldn't stay, I don't know, when did they separate or no, they never
lived
separated.
all their life together until my mom passed away.
Okay. Maybe if the father is having relationships outside the marriage that has an impact on the children, I don't know, without going into those details, but there are certain dynamics that could influence your relationship to women. But on the other side, if we take your mother now, this could be something that was triggered by your relationship with your father. If we look at your mother, the non-closeness to your mother, or the difficulty of being allowed to really be there, that could also have an impact on your ability to stay with a woman. But that is something we would have to look at when we actually do a constellation between you and your mother to really understand what are the dynamics there.
I want to take this from this sphere and bring it back into the corporate world. What would that translate into a corporate setting? Are we looking at the existing setting of the corporation, or are we looking at an image that people hold in their mind of sort of like a parenting corporation?
In terms of the corporate environment, the company is not the parent, but the same principles of order, balance, and belonging also apply, right? Just taking one example, the time somebody has spent in an organization has a certain relevance for the organization. It has to treat somebody who has been with the company for many years in a certain way. And if that is not done, it also has an effect on the company. I'll give you another. It's much more complex when it comes to organization, but just one other example. One other example is the issue of belonging. Is if it's a family company, and let's say this company has been in business for the past 50, 60 years, but the original founders have left the company. If the original founders are not remembered and respected, it usually, we also can see that there is an impact on the family. And what many businesses, especially in our Mediterranean countries do, you probably have noticed, they, for example, put pictures. And also in other countries, in Eastern countries, they put pictures of those founders, which means we don't forget you. They belong to whatever is happening today. Without them, this would have not have happened. Yeah? And this is an important element of respect, of belonging. Yeah? So this is where we find it in the corporate environment.
And there's a lot of fights between siblings in family businesses. There's an identified child who's going to take command of the business, and
right.
I've had an experience in Morocco where I realized that there's a lot of tension. This is where actually I start practicing this, is that I realized that there's a lot of tension in the group, and I asked myself, why is there so much tension on sibling relationships? And so when we did the constellation, what was very clear all of a sudden was that in those families, it's very clear up front who's going to inherit the business and who will take over. And so from the age of 8 years old, you already know that it's this brother who's going to be in charge, and you have to figure out your own way in life. And so a lot of hostility is being created in those families already because of that structure of inheritance, if you like.
Right.
And so they carry it throughout their life, and then all of a sudden, when they're mature people, they don't really understand why they continue to have these conflicts, not realizing that the seed was already planted many, many years before.
Right.
So what would you do to a family business? What do you think would be an important therapeutic process?
With businesses in general, it's many times it gets very complex because you have first of all the job of resolving the conflict inside the business, and to the business, who belongs to the business, not just the employees but also the suppliers and the customers, and you see the different departments are like the siblings, So for example, the most important department in the company, what would you think is it?
It depends on the life cycle of the company.
It's usually the finance department, because in family constellation terms, it's because we say it is in charge for the survival, for the financial survival, well-being of the company. So you have marketing and sales and all of those, and then you place them. But it gets complicated because many times things that happen inside departments, for example, or inside teams, we then see that some of the issues are related to their own families. So you cannot necessarily disconnect what happens inside a company and what happens in between people. People, we carry things from our past. And especially in family businesses, so usually you would have to link an organizational constellation with a family constellation. Yes, you do something also opposite the family itself.
Let me, I don't know where we stand with time, but I want to do a little bit of a summary and talk for a little bit about the essence of what I'm capturing here. Not only through what you're saying, but now I'm going to take it into my own world with your permission and just speak about the things that... So I've been spending a lot of energy in looking into what I call being in the moment, because through my own practice, through yoga, I realized that there is a certain power that comes when you are there, when you are in that state of mind. And I also noticed through the process of yoga, as I was lying down into this corpse pose at the end of the practice, that certain people came immediately to my awareness and distracted my ability to be completely and focused in the moment. And so I realized that these are the challenges that I'm facing that I need to work through. You can't avoid them. But what gave me power in the process was understanding that there are certain techniques that bring me into the moment. And so what I did with salespeople is that I actually trained them into certain presence techniques. I started the workshop taking them into a water park where they were jumping and riding like crazy for a few hours, and then we sat together and they were all bubbling and I said, This is the energy that you want to bring into an interaction. Look how alive and how joyful you are and how amazingly happy you are. Now bring that vibration into any interaction. And then I had them eat breakfast. And I blindfolded them and I said, now sense everything that you do and feel it. And feel the tomato and feel... So this continuous full awareness of what they're doing and throughout the interaction. And then when they got into the sales state of mind, we spoke about the ability to first see what is it that you want to achieve by the end of the engagement. So the power of visualization. I actually had people lying down on the Dead Sea and closing their eyes with this pillow that you get in the airplanes and envisioning their future through a guided visualization, and have people see what does it look like on the micro level, which is how do they get out of a sales interaction and there's a handshake and they can see that up front and they can see the success, but also how do they see their life down the road in the long run. And then before they walk into the interaction, how do they pump their energy, which is a little bit what I said about the water park, but also, again, about breathing and conscious breathing and elevating their level of awareness. And while they were doing the interaction and they're doing the sales process, the focus was on how to learn to be really present. And eye contact became a very important factor. And active listening and rephrasing, here's what I'm hearing you to say, so that I'm there. And I'm listening very carefully to identify your unique buying reason, because every individual needs to have his unique buying reason. Otherwise, I'll tell them everything that I know about my product, and that will be just an overflow of information that won't resonate with them. So I need to really be very clear about what is that unique buying reason for them. Again, being fully in the moment and fully engaged. And every time that I feel tension, water my mouth and relax. Because one of the things that happens to people when they start feeling under tension is that their mouth dries up a lot. And so how do you bring moisture into your mouth? Relaxes you. There's actually been a doctor that conducted surgery on people without anesthesia, only by asking them to continuously salivate their mouth. And so you're there, you're in the moment, you're listening very carefully, you're very attentive. As a matter of fact, you're enjoying the interaction. It is a unique meeting of two people, so that when you get out of there, you don't feel really exhausted because you actually had a good time. You were sitting there and you were learning something new from someone right there in front of you, and you were engaged with them fully. And you might have also understood that they have a need and how your product could be a solution for their need, rather than shoving it to them, really offering that as a solution to something that you both agree is a true need in that interaction. And then I said, okay, this is true in the sales encounter, and we have actually seen 34% growth of sales in the 3 months pre and post test that we've done. But this is also true for any relationship and for any interaction. This could be true for an organization. Because I've learned that organizations spend a tremendous amount of time either looking backwards, which is looking at the financial information and the data of the previous quarter or the previous year, which is a little bit like driving a car looking at the backseat mirror, or that they spend an obsessive amount of time looking into the future, and they do planning and strategic planning and detailed planning, and there's sort of like an obsession with the process of planning, and in the process of doing that, missing what's happening right now. So do you walk around? Do you see what's really happening with the organization? Are you engaged? Do you create processes where people can really talk about what's happening right now? This whole notion of management by walking around and by instilling a process where the executive committee gets together and they talk. What do you see? People share observations. What do you see? What do you see is happening? And through that, we become conscious about what is really the status of the business now, not through the financial data that will tell us later on what happened, but we are totally conscious. We're engaged with clients, we're engaged with our employees, we understand what goes on. And now the evolution is that the executive committee needs to learn to operate in a way that they're highly integrated. There's nothing that takes them away from being with each other. So I asked myself, what takes executive committee from being in the moment and being there? Obviously, it's a highly hierarchical structure, and it's very political. People are competing with each other. So there's an inherent conflict of interest in the executive committee. So I said, can you deal with that? Because in every constellation, there is a conflict of interest. There is a power struggle. And yet some are more successful than others. So I asked myself, how do you create an executive committee that really functions well? One thing I realized is that they need to have a common vision of the long run, because if they see what they want to achieve far out, and far out, usually there's a conversion of the different points of view, because if you look here, then maybe there's a conflict, but if you look the long run, what is it that we want is very similar. I've done the same thing between Israelis and Arabs, or Turks and Greece and Turks and Armenians, and I asked, what's the long-term vision? And the long-term vision is always the same. It's about having a family and raising a kid and having a peace of mind and enjoying, the fruits of your work. It wasn't about killing and, so none of that. So we do have a shared vision. And then I said, okay, now that we have a shared vision as an executive committee, how do we still learn to engage in the process of being in the moment? And I said, there's got to be a meeting. There's got to be a structured process and a rule of conduct of how they do this. And actually, I brought that from the world of forum, which is what I do with this organization called YPO and WPO, which is a methodology of equals coming together, free of conflict of interest, and having the deepest dialogue. Rule number one is there's got to be confidentiality, which means that everything that is being said in the room stays in the room. I need to know that I can expose myself. I can speak openly about my weaknesses, and that's not going to be used against me. Now that is very contradictory to every setting where people are competing for position. There's only one person who will become the CEO. Everybody wants to be a VP. And yet, can you bring that into that reality? Like the mafia. If you remember The Godfather, when Sonny is defying his father in front of the others, they go and kill him because they feel that they can break the family. How do we keep together? How do we stay together as an executive committee and realize that everything that we say in this room must stay in this room? That in this room we can fight each other like crazy, but we will never walk out of this room and fight in front of each other or in front of our people and badmouth any one of our members of the executive committee. By creating that sense of loyalty and that understanding that if you violate, you're out of here, and having that sanction there, people start understanding that sticking together or hanging together is more valuable than hanging next to each other. And then you say, okay, but what do we work on? That's a state of mind. Well, every time we get together, everybody makes a presentation. And they talk about what's happening to me and an update in my personal life. Because I've realized that it's absolutely impossible to think that you would park your personal life outside of the company as if it's not relevant. You come into a business and you say, I just had a grandson born. And we all celebrate that with you. And we can't be indifferent to that. I was running a session with one of my clients in Russia, and one of the guys said that he lost his daughter to cancer. And I thought, what a tragedy. And then I looked around and I realized that there's only 3 people in the room that are aware of that data. I said, how can that be that somebody comes into a company and only 3 people know? And he can park his personality out the door and not bring himself fully into the stage. I said, we need to be able to hear it. We need to be able to express it. You don't need to expose what happens in your bedroom, but you need to be able to talk about some of the fundamental things that are happening in your life so that we have a relationship. And then we talk about our unit and we talk about our total organization. We create an awareness of each other, and then we say, okay, how do we work on it? How do we work on the issues that you've raised? And we use either coaching, or we go into what we call, which is a presentation, where you stand up there and you talk about your issue, and we do not give you advice, but rather share with you what's our life experience been around a similar situation. So the group dynamic develops maybe similar to a healthy family, where there is love, where there is, a sense of respect to order, not trying to fight it, not trying to battle it, that there's a sense of balance, that people understand that there's a give and take or give and receive. In the business world, there's always the give and take, by the way. You use the term give and receive, which is, it's a more accepting part, and it's about learning to receive and not to take. And the notion of a sense of belonging and the glue that comes. And so the workplace does not become an alienated element in our life. It's an integral part of who we are. We live fully our identity through the workplace. And if that happens, it's not such an exhausting experience. We can actually grow and develop as individuals. This is my utopia. Some of it is already happening, but I'm not giving up because I do have a vision and I do have a dream, if I may, that companies that are run by CEOs who understand that will have a distinct characteristic and probably will have a track record of success that will be recognized around the world as the way to run organizations. Love can be present in the workplace. It is a sense of harmony that can and should be there.
Good luck with that.
Yes. So, thank you for being here and teaching us all.
Thank you for having me.
And I think this could be very beneficial for a lot of people to understand it without necessarily doing the shortcut and the learning that is required, because I know that you have a serious dedication to the learning process and not to oversimplifying it and taking it immediately into the field without giving the time to dedicated learning.
Absolutely. Cool. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And thank you, Roy.
Thank you.